Welcome, everybody, to an evening with the Hoosier Environmental Council. We'll be getting started in just a moment. People are entering in now. Okay. Emily, why don't you go ahead and take down our welcome screen? Thank you. We're going to give just one more minute for people to come in. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I'm Sam Carpenter. I'm Executive Director with the Hoosier Environmental Council, and I'm happy to be joined here this evening by our policy team. Emily Plunkett is our Manager of Outreach, and she's helping us run things in the background and keeping the webinar running smoothly this evening. Thank you for your participation, for caring about these important issues, and for giving up some of your evening tonight to be with us. Hoosier Environmental Council has been advocating for clean water, nature preservation with a big emphasis this session on wetlands and environmental health and justice issues related to lead poisoning and dealing with lead issues in our schools and our homes, clean, affordable, renewable energy, and much more in the 2024 legislative session. So we are advocating for you in our environment, and we're doing the best that we can to make our presence known. Just to give you some, for instances, in 2023, Hoosier Environmental Council was either featured or mentioned in over 100 different news media stories. In 2024, just in the beginning, we've already been in 20 different news media stories. Hoosier Environmental Council led efforts that led to over 1,000 emails going out to legislators from about wetlands. And in just about 4 days, we gained about 1,300 signatures to Governor Holcomb and asking him to speak out about a bad wetlands bill, which is 1383, which we're going to spend more time talking about this evening. But what I want you to know is that we are working hard, watching diligently, engaging actively on behalf of sustainability in our environment and improve quality of life for all Hoosiers. We do this in our time at the State House, and we do it year-round in speaking with decision makers. I do want to take a moment to thank some of our green business sponsors. So Emily, if you could put that slide up, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Green businesses have a membership at different levels with Hoosier Environmental Council, and they've demonstrated their commitment to environmental sustainability. So thank you to Logistic, Innovative Solar, Singer Wealth Advisory, Raymond James, Bricks, and Amber Blends and Renewable Energy System for their support tonight. So Emma, if you could take that back down, please. Thank you. I also want to let you know that there's going to be a survey that we're going to put in the chat toward the end of the webinar. And we would really appreciate your feedback. It's very helpful for us as we think about how to arrange these and where to focus our time and energy. So your feedback is super important. So we'll put that in later. So tonight, water has been a big issue in Indiana. There's been lots of mention of water issues in the news. So tonight we're going to start with a discussion with Indra Frank. She's our Environmental Health and Water Policy Director. And Indra, if you could share with us what you've been focusing on in the legislative session so far.
You bet, Sam. Thank you. So here we are at the halfway point in the session. The bills that have passed the Senate are moving over to the House, and the bills that have passed the House are moving over to the Senate. But in the case of wetlands, things are a little different. We have two bills related to wetlands during this legislative session. And the reason that it's important that we have bills about wetlands and laws about wetlands is that wetlands are a crucial part of our shared water resources. They can capture and hold stormwater, which reduces flooding. And while they're holding on to it, it's soaking in and recharging groundwater. They provide homes for 50% of Indiana's threatened and endangered species. Along with that, they also help purify water. The first bill I'm going to talk about is House Bill 1383. This is a bill that was drafted through a series of meetings between the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and the Builders Association. They happened over the course of the summer and fall. We heard about the meetings and expressed disappointment that the environmental groups were being excluded and other stakeholders on wetlands were being excluded from those meetings, but that our complaints were to no avail. The bill is, in our minds, a problem because it further reduces protection of state jurisdictional wetlands. To give a little background to this, in 2021, there was a bill that significantly reduced state protection for wetlands. And then in 2023, the US Supreme Court significantly reduced federal protection for wetlands. And now with the 2024 legislative session, we're getting House Bill 1383, which further reduces state protection for wetlands. It does this by shifting some of our Class 3 wetlands down to Class 2. Class 2 has very little protection, whereas Class 3 still has protection. So when you move them from Class 3 down to Class 2, you remove some of that wetland protection. We fought hard on this one, and so did many environmental and conservation organizations. It passed the House, and then it was fast-tracked. So this bill did not wait for the midpoint of the session to switch to the other chamber. It was sent to the Senate right away. There was a lengthy hearing in Senate Environmental Affairs Committee, and then it passed the Senate Tuesday, just 2 days ago. I'm sorry to say that it passed. I don't think this is the right direction for Indiana. But I took some comfort from the fact that there was bipartisan opposition to the bill. We had 8 members of the Republican caucus who joined with all of the Democrats in opposing 1383, but it's now headed to the governor's desk.
And Indra, I have a question for you. So 1383, it has been kind of an unusual process in being fast-tracked. I feel like on the Senate floor, it was asked several times why it was fast-tracked. Did we ever get an answer to that question?
The closest we've come to an answer was one of the senators hinting that maybe it was helpful for it to go faster so that our Department of Environmental Management could then convert this bill into the regulatory changes before the construction season happens. That being said, there was also a senator who pointed out that of all of the many issues that came before the legislature this session, why would wetland deregulation be the one that gets fast-tracked and the one that's pushed through the fastest and sent to the governor's desk the fastest?
Mm-hmm. And I think I can certainly speculate that in the kind of pushback and public outcry that the legislature has heard, not only in this event, but in 389, they didn't want to have more opportunity for that to happen. And I think therefore really pushed it through the process. I will say it was interesting in terms of people who were reaching out. We did hear Hoosier Environmental Council named in the Senate floor debate several times among legislators among both parties. during that debate on both sides of that debate. So definitely for those folks who have been out there and getting your voice out there, just know that you're having an impact, even though if it's not the impact that we were hoping for in terms of stopping that bill.
Right. Now, at the same time, there is a good wetlands bill. Senate Bill 246 would create a break on property taxes for property owners who preserve a half-acre wetland or larger. Fairly simple concept. It basically gives that break on property taxes to acknowledge that when a person preserves a wetland on their property, they're actually doing a good service to the broader community around them. This bill has passed the Senate. In fact, it had not a single no vote from the Senate. So now it's on to the House. And we are talking to members of the Indiana House about making sure that this one goes through. So that would be Senate Bill 246.
And Andrew, this isn't the first time this issue's come up, the idea of incentives. Can you talk a little bit about the history of that?
That's true. I believe this is the third year that that concept has been introduced as a bill. But this year it was introduced by a member of the majority party, which made it easier for it to move. Also, often concepts take a year or two or more even before they make it through the legislative process.
Great, thank you. What other things are you watching in the session?
Well, we've got a couple of others that are related to drinking water. In particular, House Bill 1399 deals with the PFAS chemicals. PFAS are the perfluorinated chemicals. It's a family of several thousand different chemicals, and they're put into many different kinds of uses, things like nonstick cookware, waterproof or stain-proof fabrics. There's some medical appliance uses. So there's a variety of uses for these things. Food packaging, like grease-proof food packaging. Unfortunately, after these chemicals have been used, they wind up getting into our waste streams, into our wastewater streams, into water generally, and then they wind up in drinking water, and they wind up in the human body. And there are a number of negative health implications of the PFAS chemicals. This bill, House Bill 1399, would create exemptions for the majority of the PFAS chemicals should Indiana ever start to try to regulate the PFAS chemicals. So I'll kind of say that again. It's creating an exemption in law for regulations that don't exist yet. It was brought to the legislature by the American Chemistry Council.
And just a little bit more about PFAS is that another common name is forever chemicals. And the reason they're forever chemicals is because they bind together so tightly they don't break down, and a little bit can get in your system and then they accumulate over time. And that's when you start seeing those serious health effects. And last year during the legislative session in 2023, a good bill that monitored the health effects on firefighters related to the firefighting foam and PFAS chemical and PFAS in their firefighting gear, because a lot of firefighters have had health effects from that. There was legislation that went through to monitor their health. And I think this bill now is almost a response to say, now that PFAS are on the radar, they're wanting to limit the definition of what can be regulated on the state level, even though there are no state regulations on PFAS. So, yes. What else are you keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so that PFAS bill, House Bill 1399, has passed the House and is now under consideration in the Senate. But there's a good one related to drinking water too. Senate Bill 5 would help to reduce lead in drinking water, or the risk of lead in drinking water. Basically, this has to do with when utilities are replacing lead service lines. Lead service lines are pipes made out of lead in older parts of our cities. And when the utilities are going through and doing those replacements, if they run into properties that are either abandoned or where the property owner is from out of state and unresponsive, then they have trouble getting the whole neighborhood, taken care of for lead service lines. The bill would just give them some additional authority to do replacements in instances like that. It also creates a fund within the accounting of the state for money that can be used to help schools and childcare centers test for lead in drinking water and address it if it's found. So that does some good things when it comes to lead in drinking water, and that's Senate Bill 5.
Great. Can you touch on the issues around water withdrawal and what
Right.
was introduced there?
Right. So that's an excellent question. On both the House side and the Senate side, identical bills were introduced. House Bill 1305 on the House side, on the Senate side, Senate Bill 249. These would have required a state permit for any entity that was going to withdraw 10 million gallons of groundwater or more per day, move it 20 miles or more, and move it for industrial and commercial purposes. And I think many people on this call probably recognize that this is related to the LEAP Lebanon proposal and and the fact that Boone County doesn't have enough water for the industries that have been proposed. So there's this notion of moving water from Tippecanoe County to Boone County. So these bills would not have stopped that project, but it would have said if you're going to be moving 10 million gallons a day or more, you would actually have to have a state permit. And in order to get the permit, you would have to study the aquifer and study what impact your withdrawals are having. Both of those bills died because they did not get hearings in their respective chambers.
And a little background about the Boone County Leap District. In the spring of last year, Andrew and I had a call with representatives from the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, IEDC, which is the organization that's really kind of the force behind the Boone County Leap District. And one of the comments that they made to us was that they were talking about piping up to 100 million gallons per day to support advanced industry. But they said it's not just that, it's also that central Indiana has a projected water shortage based on projected growth in central Indiana. So in other words, they were saying that they needed to pipe this water over anyways to support the growth in central Indiana. So as a result of the concerns and the pushback that have been expressed publicly, Governor Holcomb ordered the Indiana Finance Authority to do a comprehensive study of Indiana's water supply. So one of the things that we're saying is at the same time where we're concerned about water supply issues, we're doing this comprehensive study. The legislation that impacts our water supply through our wetlands should not be happening. Wetlands are very much closely tied to our water supply because of the water storage they provide, as well as the water they add to our aquifers. So it's a lot of these things are interconnected, and that's one of the reasons we're so concerned about the wetlands issue. Was there anything else, Sandra, that you wanted to
Well,
touch on?
thank you. I think that wraps up the major water related bills.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I forgot to say earlier for folks to please put comments and questions in the Q&A, and we're going to allow time at the end to address as many of those as we can. We've got a great group here. It looks like 78 people have joined us on the webinar this evening, so wonderful to see that participation. We're going to move over now to David Van Gelder. David is a Senior Policy and Legal Director, and he has although he was a longtime associated with Hoosier Environmental Council as a board member, he's a relatively new employee over the summer months, I believe is when you joined. And so he is, David, what have you been doing at the State House? What have you been focused on?
Well, this session has been really moving fast, as Indra indicated, and this is my first session in the State House. But it's a wonderful learning experience, in particular because the staff, the whole legislative team, is just so good at what they do. So what I've been looking at have been, of course, assisting with Indra on the wetlands things, on the various water bills that she's just described. But in addition to that, probably the first thing that I want to mention is part of my portfolio is transit. And there's a bill, SB 52, that passed the Senate and is heading over to the House Roads and Transportation Committee. And SB 52 at first blush kind of seems Indianapolis centric and not widely of interest to people in the rest of the state. But in fact, that bill focuses on eliminating dedicated lanes for the projected blue line of Indigo, which is the rapid bus transit system that the voters of Marion County and the Donut counties voted on favorably in 2016. Basically, the people said, we want rapid transit. And in particular, they wanted rapid bus transit. So far, one of the main lines, the red line, has been built. The purple line is nearing completion. And there's this effort by Senator Freeman, who's a very small part of his district is Marion County, wanting to stop the use of dedicated bus lanes. It is also statewide, has a statewide effect because it prohibits any transit system anywhere in the state, Fort Wayne, Evansville, Bloomington, from using dedicated bus lanes if they wanted to have a rapid bus transit line in their communities. And it does that for it pauses that for a year, which is unfortunately sufficient to basically end the blue line in Indianapolis, but also completely would stymie efforts statewide to do rapid bus transit. Why is this an environmental issue? Well, it is because not only is transit a very large contributor to greenhouse gases and particulate pollution from cars and buses and trucks in particular, it's also a safety issue. It's an environmental justice issue. Hoosier Environmental Council is very concerned about this bill because the way that people, workers, just regular everyday folks like us get to work is important. Getting people out of their cars and into rapid transit is probably, not probably, but definitely has some environmental benefits. So SB 52 is a bill that went through the Senate and is to be heard by the Roads Committee in the House in the upcoming weeks. Other things that I'm working on that don't seem related to each other as much, but they are, is there was a bill that mandated the Indiana Department of Natural Resources to establish rules and regulations for a bobcat hunting season. That's SB 241, and that passed out of the Senate and is again headed over to the House. That one will be in the House Committee of Natural Resources. This has come up before a few years ago in the legislature and also before the Natural Resources Commission, which is essentially the governing body of the DNR for its rules. Created a lot of controversy because as the hearing showed, there really isn't any strong, scientifically validated and peer-reviewed data to indicate that there is a necessity for a bobcat season or that it wouldn't be harmful to whatever bobcat populations do exist in spotty areas around the state, that they could be able to sustain a hunting season. So that's another one. And then on kind of on another leap to a different topic, we always are watching bills that seem to have an effect on regulatory process, administrative rulemaking, which seems really deadly boring to a lot of people. But as a lawyer, I find it quite interesting, because that's how rules get made, that's how they get enforced. And in this session, a couple of bills have come up. One of them is called SB 297 that passed the Senate and is headed over to the House. It hasn't been referred to a committee yet. But this bill would basically say, for any regulation or rule from any state agency that appears to have an effect of over $1 million in terms of compliance costs or regulatory costs, that the state legislature wants to pause that rule and have that referred back to the state legislature to either approve or not approve in this process of legislative lawmaking. So basically, it tells the agencies, we've given you a mandate under a certain statute. The agency comes up with a rule, and then the legislator comes back and says, well, that rule looks like it's going to have a big effect. We want you to stop enforcing that rule, or don't let that rule go into effect until we have a chance to look at it again. So it takes away from agency expertise. And typically, history has shown that these rules that are most commonly stopped in this way are environmental health and safety rules. So that's why HEC is particularly interested in that. There's another one that comes up that has passed the House. It's called HB 1003. This one ends the Office of Environmental Adjudication, which again had very specific expertise in enforcing environmental rules. And the legislature thought that they didn't want that anymore, so they've ended the Office of Environmental Adjudication. And that it could be problematic because, again, the expertise that has been developed in that particular administrative law body is now going to be mixed up or possibly diluted in the state of Indiana. So those are, yes, those are the things I'm looking at. And thank you for stopping me, Sam. Go ahead.
Well, and I think I'm noticing a theme. The theme that I feel like I'm seeing is a legislature that wants to get into the details of agencies and how they are running. In terms of the with the DNR specifying they need to create a bobcat season, because the DNR has the ability to do that on their own if they choose and they deem that as appropriate. But the legislator is saying they need to do that. In some of these other regulatory issues, it's a way to limit the government agencies like IDEM or DNR or others in terms of their ability to make rules, which when problems occur, we very much want those safety precautions in place to avoid those problems. And then when they do occur, we wonder why they did. So those are important issues, and it's something that we see with the General Assembly quite a bit. And there was a question that came up, and maybe we'll just hit on it right now, is that there was a question about SB 52 and the strength it has in the House coming from the Senate. And I will say we've only heard rumors that it might meet more resistance in the House than it did in the Senate. I will say also that this is something that is not the first year. It's not the first rodeo for Indigo's efforts on public transit to be stymied by the General Assembly. So far they've been able to work ways through to continue to progress with that, but we'll see what happens. But it is something that we definitely, Hoosier Environmental Council is going to be active on, and we would encourage people to reach out and organize around this. Anything else, David?
If you don't mind, I could just answer one question pretty quickly on live that came. And the questioner asks about discussion on either hunting or protecting mountain lions or cougars entering the state. And I can say that I sat in all the hearings on the Bobcat bill, and no one once mentioned cougars, mountain lions, catamounts, or any other name for the larger cat, only bobcats. So it's a good question, and there you go.
Great. Well, thank you, David. We're going to switch gears now and go to climate and energy. And Delaney Barber is our climate and energy and climate manager. And so Delaney's been very active, not just on that, but on other issues as part of our team at the State House this session. But, another question that came in the Q&A that I want to address now is, how do you stay positive? And I will say the reason I got into this work is because of the concern and just feeling a bit overwhelmed by the state of climate issues and our environment. And the way I do think one way to stay positive is to be engaged, is to be involved with the issues, because not only are you taking action, but you're also part of a community that's doing that, or you can find community in that process. And the other thing I would say about it is that we are seeing some progress. And we can look at what we're doing and seeing where we're having an impact. So that's really important. And Delaney, when you talk about that, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what's happening on the federal level with climate and energy as well.
Yes, thank you, Sam. Yeah, to stay positive, in addition to what Sam has said and Indra also has said in the Q&A, I am really humbled and grateful to be a part of this team and to work with you all to have environmental action being taken at the state level. And I do know that if we weren't here and we didn't show up, a lot worse things would happen. And that's progress in and of itself. And sometimes we also get some big wins too. Just like the Indiana climate action planning that's currently going on. Of course, I have more extensive blog posts on our website that you can read further on both the state and regional climate planning process, but I'll briefly kind of overview that today. First, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM, accepted the EPA's climate pollution reduction grant. This gave them $3 million to start planning towards climate action. And it will open up $4.6 billion nationally for plan implementation. And we expect the individual grants for states to be anywhere from $2 million to $500 million based on the plan's competitiveness. And this is going to be a multi-year planning and implementation process. However, Hoosier Environmental Council has been very active on commenting on both the state and Central Indiana Regional Plan, really prioritizing renewable energy, energy efficiency, urban canopy, and really meaningful environmental justice, community benefits. That's a big part of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. Not only is it for application competitiveness, but it's just the right thing to do. And through that, IDEM has hired 2 more community outreach individuals, as well as hosted 2 more meetings after stakeholder input. One is actually happening right now in Evansville, Indiana. And because of stakeholder feedback, we actually saw a change in their draft plan, and it really does focus more on promoting renewable energy, decarbonizing our grid, as well as residential and commercial building efficiency. And there's even an increase in landfill diversion like composting, which we heard at the Fort Wayne public meeting. So it really shows that your public input does matter, and it's really going to change climate action in the state.
Yeah, and one thing that, we've encouraged is getting broad support and broad input, and including those kind of Justice 40 low income communities, communities that have felt a lot of the brunt of bad environmental policy. It is a challenge. It's because the state has a way of doing their process that they've always done. So getting that change to happen, it's not a natural thing that happens. Even though the Inflation Reduction Act clearly states 40% of the benefit needs to go to environmental justice communities, getting that to that process of shifting behavior, shifting pattern, shifting habits is challenging, but we're continuing to kind of put our voice out there and advocate for that. We are thrilled that the state is participating in this program and see that a lot of benefit can come of it. Delaney, what are you watching at what have you been watching at the State House in addition to some of the things that we've already talked about?
Yes, as energy and climate manager, it never gets boring at the State House. On the clean energy front, we saw a lot of good bills introduced this session, which holds a lot of promise, especially, as we enter election year and next budget session. I think we have some really great language to use in the future and talk with legislators about. One of the very important bills we worked hard on in preparation for the session and during this first half was House Bill 1193, which was the Independent Community Solar Bill. This was authored by Representative Carrie Hamilton of Indianapolis, and it was also co-authored by Representative Sue Arrington of Muncie. This piece of legislation is really important for opening up community solar in Indiana. This would allow private capital and not ratepayer dollars to make solar accessible to homeowners, renters, small businesses, and more. These projects can go just about anywhere, and they're much smaller than utility scale solar, which is really promising for local energy generation that stays local where it's being used, as well as helps with some of our conversations and concerns that some rural legislators have with land use and farmland. Community solar can go anywhere and takes up far less land than utility scale. So we see this as really promising. And however, the community solar site would have to communicate with the utilities so that they could properly apply solar credits and put energy on the local grid, which is why we need that legislation through the State House. Oh, Sam, you're muted.
Sorry, go ahead. Go on. What else are you looking at?
Yes. Well, let's see. Senate Bill 177 concerned agrivoltaics. This was the only bipartisan bill for clean energy that we saw this session. It was authored by Senator Shelley Yoder of Bloomington, and Senator Dorio was co-author from Goshen. It was in Senate Environmental Affairs, which unfortunately only met once this session. And it would have created an agrivoltaics task force. Agrivoltaics is a really broad term that's used to describe a dual-use parcel of land that grows food and solar energy. And Indiana, along with other states and countries as well, have successfully grown a wide range of crops, grazed animals, and even harvested honey. There's actually a project in Henry County that grazes sheep and produces solar honey. This is really important because while agrivoltaics is allowed in Indiana right now, this would help determine the state role in agrivoltaics, like such as tax incentives possibly. And it would be a chance to really educate legislators on the possibilities of agrivoltaics and display successful projects already in place in Indiana. And some legislators and communities are concerned about land use and solar, like I said. So solar is the only development where you can successfully do both.
Yeah, and in both of the agrivoltaics and the community solar, are their solutions, they're creative solutions to some of the challenges with renewable energy. And so another thing that keeps me positive is that there are so many solutions out there. It's how do we collectively make decisions to move them forward? That's the challenge almost as much more than the finding the right path forward. It's getting everyone working together on that path. There are some real positive signs in terms of community solar. It is something that is active in a number of other states. It's got broad support, and we're part of a coalition of Hoosiers for Community Solar, advocating for that and working to broaden that coalition to have more, businesses and municipalities and in different places that would benefit from community solar. What else? What else are you looking at, Delaney?
There was one more positive bill from this session that we saw, Senate Bill 259, which would create energy and wastewater districts. This was authored by Senator Cadora of Indianapolis, and it went to Senate Tax and Fiscal Committee. So we see energy bills sometimes go to the non-utility committees. So it's best to follow all of them. And this creates an avenue for local governments to kind of raise funds to support clean energy improvements, including community solar, which we worked with Senator Cadora along with Hoosiers for Community Solar to include that in there, as well as on-site solar, battery storage, and energy efficiency projects on anything like commercial, industrial, agricultural property, schools, and local government buildings. On top of that, it also touches with some of Indra's work as well, because it has wastewater improvement districts. It allows these improvement districts that same kind of funding avenue to connect properties to the municipal sewer system to get off of septic. And that's the last positive bill I have.
Yeah, and one of the neat things about that, I mean, it gets really technical into the weeds, but it's a funding mechanism that advances credit based on the energy savings you'll have in efficiency, and then in addition to renewables. So there are creative ways to address some of those things. Anything else that you want to touch on?
Yes, so we saw a lot of good legislation that unfortunately did not advance, but that's something to contact your legislators about and share your disappointment with them not supporting or advancing the bill. However, there was a bill this session, House Bill 1382, and this kind of catered to coal interests and fossil fuel interests. And it had some language in it that we've seen also in the state of Kentucky to keep coal plants running as long as possible and potentially it kind of inhibit the clean energy transition and the ability for Indiana to accept and implement funds like the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant program. But we did not see this language advance, and we're going to keep watching. But as always, this could come back next year or in subsequent years. And so we need to keep really pushing the positive legislation we saw, while also kind of quieting down the bad bills.
Yeah, and interesting, in the session in 2023, there were implementation of these 5 pillars of energy policy. They were reliability, resilience, stability, affordability, and environmental sustainability. So this bill that Delaney's referring to, 1382, which died, at least we think it's dead, is one that would have countered, kind of undone a lot of the work of the recommendations of the Energy Task Force and what was put into place during the last session. Now, what's important is that affordability, environmental sustainability, resilience are part of the 5 pillars, because those things very much speak to renewable energy, clean renewable energy. If all you're thinking about is reliability, and that's what the utilities focus on, is whether or not you can turn the lights on when you need them, and that's clearly critical. But if that's your only thing, then you're not going to be thinking about affordability. You're not going to be thinking about environmental sustainability, necessarily resilience in the face of severe storm and weather and that sort of thing. So it is really positive that those 5 pillars were put into place, because then that provides guidance at the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, which is the organization that really oversees the utilities and how they plan out their resources. So I'd say that's a positive thing. And I think that contributed to that 1382 bill that was really wanting to support further coal in Indiana not getting a hearing. Okay. Well, thanks, Delaney. I want to invite Toby to put on his camera. Toby is our newest member to the team. He's our Sustainable Agriculture Director. And Toby was brought on with HEC really kind of right before the session got started. So Toby, I wanted to ask you to maybe introduce yourself and a little bit of impressions that you've seen in your time at the State House, and kind of how that work is being done.
Thanks, Sam. And I guess I want to first start off by thanking Sam and the rest of the HEC staff for being so welcoming, and everyone's greeted me with open arms and big smiles, and made my acclimated into this new role very easy, as well as all the HEC supporters and partners out there that have reached out and welcomed me in. Definitely thank you all for welcoming me into the organization. HEC has a long history of doing some outstanding work and improving the quality of lives for all Hoosiers. And my short time here has been, I've realized that this is a team of dedicated and passionate professionals, and I'm very excited, very honored to be part of the team. So with that, I guess I grew up in Indiana, Steuben and DeKalb counties, went to Purdue, got a bachelor's and master's degree there, went and worked with EPA for a year in their wetlands branch, doing wetland dredge and fill and mitigation permitting. The last 20 years I've spent with the Alliance of Indiana Rural Water as their source water specialist. And I worked with communities all over the state of Indiana, helping them protect their sources of drinking water. So yeah, I started in November with HEC, and kind of got thrown right into the legislative session. So it's been a little intimidating, trying to figure out how the bills are introduced, the committees, first, second, third reading. I'm very impressed with how fast people can read. Yeah, it's been a very educational and interesting process of seeing how legislation is done, how bills are taken from committee and ran through the House legislative process. So,
and Toby, we had a conversation earlier about the drainage handbook and some activity that happened around that. Can you share some about that?
Yeah, Senate Bill 105 is the updating of Indiana's drainage handbook. Indiana's drainage handbook, basically explains federal, state, and local laws and regulations that affect drainage improvement activities. It also provides specific best management practices that define how work should be performed in a drainage way to minimize environmental impacts. That handbook was last updated and revised in 1999. So in the last 25 years, there's been a lot of improvements in science and technology and equipment and how we design our waterways that aren't currently represented in the current handbook. So there is a need to update that handbook. So SB 105 authorizes the Indiana State Department of Agriculture to select a contractor to draft an updated version of the Indiana Drainage Handbook. The bill also requires an advisory board must be appointed to oversee the contractor and review the document. As that bill made its way through the Senate, several amendments were passed and those amendments were basically to include additional representatives that would be appointed on that advisory board. One of those amendments were to specifically make sure that a representative from the environmental sector was included on that advisory board. Drainage has a big impact on Indiana's environment. You know, it affects our lakes, our rivers, our streams, our wildlife, aquatic species, flooding, recreation. So having the newest science and technology represented in an updated drainage handbook would most likely decrease the impacts that drainage improvement activity would have on Indiana's waterways. So this is a bill that has passed through the Senate and is going on to the House. It's something that HEC does support. So that's what.
Great, thank you. And Indra told me that Senator Jean Lysing, who I think authored the bill, came up to her in the hallway at the State House and said, "You're going to like the amendment," because she was adding environmental representation on the advisory board that would oversee the updates to the handbook. So it's great that they're taking that approach and including environmental as part of that stakeholder group. And that's the thing that we want to advocate for as these bills are being developed. Certainly, we would have liked to have been one of the stakeholders that had a voice in the conversations around 1383 and the wetlands legislation. It's important that the environmental community and those interests that are just so basic to basic quality of life issues are represented, but not always immediately apparent to folks that how environmental issues so closely connect with our water quality, our quality of life, and things like that. So great to see that progress of seeing the representation from the environmental community on that advisory board. Anything else, Toby?
No, a lot of the agriculture bills that we were watching didn't make it out of committee. So Senate Bill 105 is one that I've been focusing on.
Okay. Well, thank you, Toby. And I think we're going to kind of close out with a few more comments. And then also we want to give people time to answer questions. We did get some questions put in as well. One thing that I want to kind of leave with you all is that we are making progress. We had some good wins in 2023 around conservation funding, investments in clean water through the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, Lakes and River Enhancement Program, lead mitigation. We're seeing that some positive things working their way through the session this in 2024 as well. And one of the things that we really want to do is to build a broad coalition of voices to have an impact, to expand our own impact. Ways that you can be engaged is to be informed. We have our bill watch page on our website. I think you'll see that in the chat if you want to visit that, just to see the bills that we're focused on. We probably will be keeping track of 70 or 80 bills. Maybe 20, 25 will make it to our bill watch page. And so we try to pull out those priority bills that we want to really focus on. But also attending, town halls, meet your legislator events, and other public engagement opportunities that you can have with your representatives. And in those instances, speaking out for what you care about and what's important. Reaching out to your legislators by calling or emailing. And the more you can do to customize that and personalize that to you, the more impactful it will be. We can help facilitate that through forms that we have on our website. And it's great to have, a lot of people reach out to their legislators. But the more you can customize that and make it personal to you, the more impactful it will be. Or requesting a meeting if you want to take that step of actually sitting down with your legislator or having a virtual meeting. We're happy to be a resource in doing that as well. And it's kind of about building relationships. If you can build a relationship over time, then you can be a trusted voice to speak with these decision makers, our elected officials. I do also want to say events that, different groups are having. Renewable Energy Day. I know Delaney put something in the chat about that. That's going to be on Tuesday. And we are trying to facilitate meetings with legislators. During that time, there'll be a lunch provided, and we're going to invite legislators down to have lunch. And that could be an opportunity to talk with them before as well. And I've said this before that our power is your commitment. So really, HEC, Hoosier Environmental Council, is only as influential as a shared voice that we can present, to the extent that we can channel energy and focus, to the extent that, we have people behind us that are making their voices heard, then that gives us much more, that really amplifies our message as we're meeting with these decision makers. So you can support by, taking up these call to actions, being at events like this, and just, letting us know how that's going for you. And we would love to be a resource. I'd like to ask Emily to put the survey into the chat. Please take a moment and fill out the survey. We hope you do it while you're still on the call with us this evening, because again, we really appreciate your feedback, and it's very helpful as we think about how to do this. Again, I also want to thank Green Businesses. And I don't know if Emily, if you can pop up that Green Business slide one more time. And just say too that much of our work is supported by individuals. If you're new to HEC, if you support what we do, or think what we do is important, maybe consider supporting financially. You can do that through our website. You can do it. You can do like a $5 reoccurring gift or something that's affordable to you. But I'd invite you just to consider that, to the extent that you think this is something you want to get behind and support. I'd love to take your questions. Let's see what we've got here. And if everybody, our panelists would put your cameras back on here. And we've been with you an hour now, and we're happy to stay on longer and do questions. Let's see. Let's see. I want to start one with Indra. There was a question that came in earlier about where do we want to prioritize wetlands going forward. There's a lot of concern, like, what do we do? How do we address this? And what is the path forward for positive wetland policy and wetlands, a future for wetlands in Indiana.
Yeah, well, it's discouraging, you know, with the reduction in state wetland protection in 2021 and then further reduction this year, but we can't stop. We've got members of both parties who understand the importance of wetlands, so we need to build off of that. We need to build off of the momentum of Senate Bill 246, which gives up a voluntary incentive. Maybe look at other options for voluntary incentives for wetland preservation and wetland restoration. And I think we need to continue talking about having a wetland permitting program that everybody can live with. The Conservation Law Center worked with wetland scientists last summer to come up with an alternative wetland permitting program. We're talking that up with leaders around the state, hoping that one might be a bill discussion for next year.
Yeah, and as we can have those conversations, then we can be a voice in influencing those ultimate decisions that get made in that legislation. Another question along those lines was, did HEC set up a petition webpage that people can join? We did do a petition around asking Governor Holcomb to speak out against this bill. Will Governor Holcomb, veto HB 1383? It's very unlikely. Governor Holcomb is the one that, as I understand it, asked the item and the builders to sit down and come together on a bill. So I think that we're going to continue this fight around wetlands, but I think it's not likely that 1383 is going to be stopped after going through both chambers.
No, but that being said, I think contacting the governor's office and making the request is legitimate. He needs to hear from the voters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's a great idea and helpful.
Could I chime in here, Sam, real quick?
Yeah, please.
Because I think there's a related question. The caller asks, any ideas can encourage more pro-environmental candidates to run for office? You know, one of the things that I've observed as a kind of a newbie to the session is that a lot of the interests expressed by the legislators are very narrow. It's what they do for their living is what they push forward in the legislature. Builders, developers, or people maybe who have been involved in education, and that's all reasonable and legitimate. But if you want people who understand, as this writer says, pro-environment, you need people who understand science. You need people who understand the importance of public policy. So in terms of moving the ball forward with the agenda that HEC has been pursuing for 40 years, it would be helpful to look for candidates and support those candidates who expressed an interest in understanding not highly technical things, but basic science, and like how water flows on the ground or beneath the ground. That's kind of important. And that would be a way to move the ball forward, to get more folks like pretty much the Democratic caucus and the 8 members of the Republican caucus who voted against HB 1383. We get more of those people, we move the ball forward.
Well, and certainly, it's been a real concerted effort, as I understand it, from the Indiana Builders Association to identify open seats, find candidates, and fund them. So there certainly there needs to be more to happen so that people don't run unopposed, and people to vote there. When you go to the polls, vote those things that you care about. And somebody asked earlier, what do you do if your legislators agree with you? And it's a question we often get, and it is as we want to be advocates and have an impact. That is a challenge in the fact that well, of course, we want them to agree, but I think one thing that you can do that is meaningful is just a simple thank you. If you can just let them know that you see them supporting those issues that you care about, I think that's impactful. Also, leadership, committee chairs, they represent the state and the decisions of the state. While certainly somebody who lives in that district might have a stronger voice, still, I think it's important to reach out to those committee chairs and committee members because really they're making decisions for all of us.
Sam, if I could,
Yeah,
I'll
please.
just add a point on that question about what if my legislator is already voting the way I want them to vote. It's still very useful to those legislators to have constituent backing for the votes that they're taking, so that when they make that vote, they can stand up and say, my constituents want me to vote this way. So yeah, it's still useful to let your legislator know, even if you know they're already going to vote the way you want them to.
Yeah, oh, and I see Leslie has put in about the Carmel Greens legislative voters guide, which is it's a Voters for Green Indiana's Green Voters Guide. It is a good resource, and Leslie, if you want to even put that into the Q&A, that website, if you've got a link, we'll stick it in the chat so everybody can see it.
And if I could also add to the question that Indra was talking about, you know, it is also helpful to share your story with your legislators, even if they agree with you. Stories really matter at the State House, and they use that on the floor when they're explaining their vote or they're asking questions on a bill, that they have constituents, real constituents with real stories, like SB 52 and public transit. Many local Indianapolis legislators stood up and talked about their constituent stories and who had reached out to them and why public transit in Indianapolis was important.
Great. Let's see if anybody sees another question in there they want to look at. Feel free. There was a question. Let's see. Some people are asking kind of like the impact of somebody asked a question about new Republican Senator Good from Terre Haute, asked to be removed as author from a bill. The other things that we hear are things like, you know, somebody else referred to a question in the Q&A about somebody has expressed concerns, but they still voted in favor. I think one thing that we realize is that people are open to like learning more, and certainly legislators have so many bills that they're dealing with. They can't be experts on everything. So they do rely very heavily on those trusted voices within their caucus. They rely heavily on leadership's determination of what the priorities are. But still, there are times when if we can share information in, you know, the importance of it and help inform, then you will see elected officials vote against their party. Not against their party, but for legislation that they believe, even though the majority of their party does not. So we do see that. I do think it's impactful, and because there was broad, you know, 8 Republicans joined Democrats in opposing 1383, I think there's a door to approach going forward on having further conversations about that. Let's see, what other questions are in the Q&A that we want to make sure we address? Here's a question about, are there grants for environmental stewardship on private lands for farmers? I don't know, Toby, can you speak to that some?
yeah, there's a whole host of grants and easement programs available for farmers, private landowners for both agriculture and forest land. Soil and water conservation districts have some urban soil health programs, grants available for smaller specialty farm groups. But I'll type my email in there, and I can give you all kinds of resources if anyone wants to reach out. More information on potential funding sources.
Yeah, and somebody put a comment in here, Senator Durnall from Northwest Indiana, who voted against 1383, had attended an Audubon Save the Dunes meeting to learn more about nature and express his support. And that to me just speaks to how much what we do is we're part of a coalition working with other organizations. And we are all working together on these efforts and having, you know, an impact together. So thanks for sharing that.
I mean, that's true in every topic area we work on. Certainly the work that I've been doing this session on wetlands, it's just been tremendous working with all the partner organizations on that. And I know, David, that's true with the transit bill as well, or Delaney, the solar bill.
That's right. So much of what we do is working in coalition with others. Somebody asked a question about, can you highlight some of the environmental justice bills of the session? And so environmental justice touches so many different aspects. So community solar is very much of environmental justice issue because community, and by the way, our environmental justice director just became part of a I'm not coming up with the right word, but a group that's going to be focused on community solar, Paula Brooks, and environmental justice. But what that does, it makes clean renewable energy accessible to people. So if you're a renter or you don't have the upfront money for solar on your roof, then it's not accessible. But through community solar, all you do is you sign on, you become a subscriber, and you're immediately getting savings on your energy bills. It sounds too good to be true, but it's actually not, because what's happening is the developer of the project is paying the upfront cost of the development, and they're getting incentives to federal government to help make that a profitable venture for them. So that's one of the reasons community solar is just kind of this win-win situation. Also, a lot of the bills around lead in schools and homes, and there was a bill that didn't make it through that focused on tenant rights, because unfortunately, sometimes what happens if a tenant speaks out about concerns with lead or environmental issues in their homes, if they become aware of it, they speak out, they might actually lose their ability to stay in that residence. So that's very much an environmental justice issue. So many of these bills are. Go ahead.
Sorry to see that bill die. Right. It was Senate Bill 277 that would have allowed renters to put their rent payments into escrow if repairs were not being made on the rental property. And that plays into environmental health situations like mold or, you know, old lead paint hazards that might be present in those rental properties.
Okay.
Yeah, and another bill, I mean, David has already talked about this, but Senate Bill 52 on public transit, that's a huge environmental justice issue. And actually in the climate pollution reduction grant survey process in the regional plan, when they narrowed it down to environmental justice communities, public transit was the #1 response by stakeholders. Yeah,
and unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that got prioritized either by item or the regional grant planning. So we'll continue to put that out there, that's an important issue. I do want to say again, if you can click on the survey and let's see, Emily, will you put that survey in one more time, just so it's at the bottom of the chat? Somebody put in a message that they didn't see it in the chat. Like to encourage everybody, there it goes. You can click on that, just takes a few minutes to fill that out. But we want to thank everybody so much for coming and being here, being advocates, and being part of this event this evening. So thank you very much, and everybody have a wonderful evening, and we'll continue to keep you informed. We've got a weekly email that goes out about updates about what's going on at the session, and we sure appreciate your interest. Have a great evening.